I'm Edward October. The sound you hear is midnight in a quiet American suburb. This is the start of Octoberpod.
There's a god in the pool behind my house. At least, I thought it was a god.
It arrived near the end of October, in the dead of night. While the neighborhood slept, Harper was awakened by the sound of something hitting the window. Tossing off his covers, he jumped to his feet and looked outside to a world illuminated by starlight. There on the ground, a twitching pile of jet-black feathers lay writhing. Harper mistook the thing for a crow or a raven at first. After all, it wasn't the first time a bird had smashed into the window. Harper, still half asleep, thought about helping it. And then it began to scream. A call, a death rattle, a prayer to eternity to end its misery. But as seconds passed, the raspiness of its cry began to fade while the volume only grew. Its cadence changed to something resembling the horn of a train getting closer. The grass around the creature decayed to create the outline of a perfect triangle, and Harper became fixated on its eyes and how they reflected the light from the moon. One could hear flesh and feathers starting to tear open along the pitiable beast's back. The sky provided just enough clarity to make out what Harper would come to wish he'd never seen. Hands, several of them. Each digit on each hand writhing and wriggling like a tadpole that had found itself on land. After a few moments of struggle, the hand touched earth and began to drag themselves, the feathered carcass and Harper's horrified attention, toward the decrepit swimming pool. Its fingers now moved in a rhythmic pattern more commonly associated with the feet of a millipede. The joints made a wet, crackling sound, while the hole from where the hands had been birthed sputtered some dark, heavy liquid. The creature made its way under the fence surrounding the abandoned above-ground pool. It stopped at the edge of the pool and positioned its hands in a circle below its torn, feathered body, pushed it upward. Long, sickly arms with spider-like joints revealed themselves as the body continued its ascent higher into the evening air. It pushed its body up just enough to flop into the pool, and Harper lost sight of it.
Don't ask me why, because I don't know myself, but I went after it. I put on a jacket and socks and shoes, no hesitation. I brought a flashlight, but I didn't really need it. The moon and stars were bright that night, and I went to get a closer look. I should have been scared, but I felt safe. More safe than I'd felt, perhaps, ever before in my life.
Harper didn't go out to the pool much. No one did. It had come with the house, in dire need of repair, but at the bottom of a long list of other things that needed urgent fixing. The pool was always considered a problem for another time. Just a few steps into the yard, and Harper was chilled down to his very marrow. But when he peered over the edge of the water, he felt warmer, just looking at the thing. Its bony arms were hidden away once again, and it crawled around on the surface.
I could get a better look at its wings now. They were huge.
But shattered, so it used its many hands to move. It wasn't cold enough for ice, but Harper had to touch the surface to fully understand what he was seeing. The pool was still liquid, putrid, stagnant water, but the celestial creature before him crawled on the surface as if it were solid. Harper said hello to it.
I was trying to break the ice. Get it?
The creature, unsurprised by Harper's presence, didn't stop what it was doing. When it finally spoke, it used the boy's own voice.
Hello, child. Be not afraid.
You sound just like me.
That must have been scary, unnerving, any of those things, right?
No. It was exciting. I asked it what it was doing.
No, the first question Harper asked was, "Why are you walking on the water?" But then Harper asked what really should have been the first question. What are you?
By then, my eyes had adjusted more to the night, and I was able to see the thing more clearly.
Yes, it had the head of a bird, but it looked more like an eagle than a raven. Its eyes reflected the moon like the eyes of a cat. Its body was long and snake-like to accommodate its many hands, and the viscous liquid that had been leaking out where the arms popped out had finally slowed to a trickle. It was like the creature was wearing the carcass of a bird as a disguise.
I'm an angel,
He said.
I decided that it was a he because he sounded like me.
Of course, real angels are neither male nor female.
But I didn't know that. I'm just a kid.
Angel. Written especially for Octoberpod by Annie Morgan, co-creator of the podcast Inside Your House. From an original idea by Madeline Zaitzoff, narrated by Edward October, and starring Arthur Williams, co-host of Family Plot Podcast, as Harper.
Anyway, finding out what he was didn't surprise me at all. I felt just so safe around him, so drawn to him.
That's why Harper told the angel he'd help him however he could. And then the angel told Harper to help him hide. He said he was trying to catch a frog or a tadpole. And then he finally opened his eyes. All of them. They dotted his entire body. Some large and bulging, some little more than pinpricks, some partially obscured behind feathers, but all of them glowing and flashing the most awful colors.
I'm running out of time, so hurry, quickly. Go into your house, grab something sharp, whatever is closest, and meet me back out here,
He said. And so Harper came back out, with a kitchen knife in hand.
This lovely, bright, beautiful creature needed my help, and I wanted to help it, no matter what.
Such an accommodating child.
I need you to cut yourself. Not deep, just enough to spill some blood in the water.
Without hesitation, the boy sliced his hand. Because that's what they do in the movies for things like this. Important things. Blood oaths and the like. Harper watched the red liquid, which looked black under the night sky, drip, drip, drip into the water. It was instantaneous. The angel sank, and only just in time, too. The second he was completely submerged, sirens cried out in the distance. It was a sound similar to the screech the angel had made when he first fell into the yard.
Only this time, I felt afraid.
Harper hid next to the dented plastic poolside and didn't dare to speak or even breathe. Something was coming. Had it not been the middle of the night, and had it not been coming from the wrong direction, he would have thought it was the sun. All he saw was fire. He closed his eyes, praying for it to pass. Surely helping the angel would amplify his prayers. Something flew above him, but it was so bright it hurt his eyes, even with them closed. There was a rhythmic wind, something huge flapping above the house, something that must have been the size of an aeroplane. The noise it made was deafening. It was what Harper imagined the trumpets at the end of the world would sound like a tornado siren that taps directly into your worst fears and pulls them out. If the Earth were to end in a nuclear apocalypse, then this might be the sound that would signal the bombs. This was the sound of the end times. Then it was gone. Harper didn't open his eyes for a long time. A long time. It felt like an eternity. He was afraid he'd wake up in a void. But when he finally did, he was still in the yard, still up against the lip of the pool. He stood to check on his new friend and saw the water steaming. But there at the bottom was the angel.
I began to think of him as mine then, because I'd save him, and I wanted him to save me.
He rose up from the bottom. The black gore around his hands washed off into the pool, mixing with Harper's blood and the blood of a few frogs that now floated dead on the surface.
Thank you, child. You've done something miraculous today. Now go back to sleep.
The next day, all of the frogs and tadpoles were gone from the pool, and the water looked clearer. Though lit by the sunrise, it was blood red. Harper saw his angel in the light for the first time then, and he asked the boy if he could help him accomplish his mission. But now his voice had a gravelier, almost phlegmy quality. It sounded like Harper whenever he was sick. The phrase, frog in the throat, comes to mind.
And it had made me wonder where they had all gone. The frogs, I mean.
To that question, the angel simply explained that on Earth, angels have to eat, something that he'd need Harper's help doing. As the sun rose higher, Harper could see that his new friend's wounds had healed, and his arms now slid effortlessly from the holes in his feathered hide, extending and retracting as he used them to swim. His extra eyes, which he kept secret, were closed most of the time. His feathers were dark brown in the daylight, with bits of gold sprinkled throughout, and his face was now hawk-like. He instructed the boy in a voice that now sounded more like sick than like Harper, and told him to catch him some flies to eat today, so that he could try and heal his wings. Harper made honey traps with coffee cups, and scattered them out on the seldom-used part of the lawn. But being so late in the year, he worried that the bugs might not be biting. But his angel assured him that there was a heat wave coming, and the bugs would be all right. The angel was soon proven right. Coming up out of the grass were dozens of flies buzzing around. These little traps accumulated countless flies, mosquitoes, gnats, and other assorted creepy crawlies, which Harper dumped into the water, washing the writhing masses into the pool. The water had stayed red, but not as bold a red as it had been in the sun. Harper marveled at the fact that angels could bleed, too.
There was something so satisfying about knowing my blood was mixing with his, like I would become holier by association. I wanted to ask my angel if he'd help me, because I helped him, help me be forgiven for my sins.
And so, Harper asked the angel that very thing. The angel assured the boy that he'd give the master his highest recommendation on all matters of sin and forgiveness. Then he released the boy from his service for the remainder of the day.
I worried less, knowing that he was well fed and healing.
It was a golden afternoon that day, and had the trees not already shed their leaves, one would have sworn it was summer. But there was death in the air. Harper could smell it the second he stepped outside. Then death's presence was confirmed by the hushed and anguished conversations coming from next door. Harper peered over the fence and saw his neighbors, the entire family, huddled around the chicken coop. The kids were distraught, the adults mad. The boy yelled over the fence to see if everyone was okay, only to find out that something had gotten into the neighbor's chicken coop. They'd had 6 chickens. All were now dead. Harper went to the edge of the property, trying to get a look at the chickens. What he saw was covered in flies. Still, it was gruesome enough to make him feel ill. The next time he saw the angel, it was the first thing he spoke of.
Our property was big enough that I didn't have to worry about my neighbors overhearing me, even in the daylight. Also big enough that we didn't have to smell that chicken coop. Very often, anyway. I talked to my angel about it as he swam laps in the pool.
The angel was now able to swim while holding his wings up out of the water. Harper told the angel about the flies, told him that there were so many flies on the chickens, it looked almost as if the flies had slaughtered them.
No, child, it's something much worse, I'm afraid.
He now sounded nothing like Harper, which made the boys sad.
He must be using his real voice now.
There's a terrible plague coming, but I can't do anything about that. I just need you to bring me eggs.
And Harper did as he was told. He snuck into the chicken coop as soon as it got dark and grabbed as many as he could find. The dead chickens had been moved, but there were still piles of flies feasting on the blood and gore left behind.
I got out as fast as I could. Looking at it still made me feel sick.
When Harper dumped the eggs in the pool, he figured that the angel was probably going to eat them, so he decided not to stick around.
The idea of an angel having to eat food the same way we do made me feel strange.
Yes, eating does seem like a vulgar act, an act somehow beneath the likes of an angel. Harper had never felt so sick as he did the next morning. He had red spots all over his body, and as the day wore on, they opened up into bloody sores. He waited until his parents left for work. Then he went to the pool. The boy's throat was so raw he could hardly speak, but without even croaking out the words, "Help me," the angel said,
My child, of course I will help.
Harper wanted to ask the angel if he could heal him, and as if he'd heard the boy's thoughts, the angel said,
I can do better than heal you. I can baptize you.
The angel led Harper to the pool. The boy dragged himself up the ladder using the very last of his strength, and then splashed in. The angel caught Harper with his long, long arms, dotted with glowing, madly staring eyes. Some slitted like the eyes of a cat, and held the boy close.
Think of all your sins,
He said.
So, I thought of cheating off Becky Rogers in my math class. I thought of stealing a bunch of Red Bulls from 7-Eleven. But worst of all, I thought of my little sister Elizabeth. I thought about babysitting her. I thought about letting her go to her friend Sarah's house across the street. Mom and Dad let her do that all the time. I thought about how I should have walked her there. I held her hand, maybe. I thought of how if I'd just stayed with her long enough, I could have seen the car coming. I thought of being forgiven. Forgiven by my parents, first of all. And then being forgiven by Jesus. I thought of all the bad thoughts I'd had because of the things they'd said to me. I thought about getting into heaven now, when I'd been planning on ending up in hell for so long.
The angel lowered the boy down. The water was warm and smelled of copper. It splashed away all of Harper's sores and healed his skin. And when he pulled the boy out, he was like brand new. The next day, Harper went over to his pool, but before he did, his mother told him to be careful in the yard. It was the first time she'd spoken to him in quite a while. The boy was happy. There was a storm brewing, and Harper worried about the angel being alone in the cold, but the angel said he only needed one last thing from him, and he'd be all healed up. He said he needed to be set free. He said he couldn't leave the pool without Harper's permission. Well, Harper rushed to the shed to get an axe. A nice sturdy hatchet. They still had hours of daylight left, but the storm clouds were so intense it looked like twilight was approaching. Without hesitation, he chopped the side of the pool. Water rushed out, and the boy hurried to demolish one side utterly.
It felt good to destroy something.
The angel slipped through the hole in the pool with the gushing water and shook himself off. Water flooded the yard then, and Harper's parents began yelling something from inside the house. The wind stole their words. The first splashes of rain started. The angel stood to his glorious full height, and for the first time Harper saw his wings unfurl. There were 6. Though they weren't broken anymore, the feathers were falling off. The angel flapped his wings, shaking off the remaining feathers like a November wind stripping naked the boughs of their most stubborn autumn leaves. The boy's parents were running outside now as the sky darkened, yelling at Harper to get away, but the boy only yelled back,
"Don't worry, he's an angel."
The feathers were now fully gone, exposing leathery bat-like wings beneath. Harper hoped his angel was okay. His face was changing now, too, the eyes on either side of his nose growing farther apart and burning like coals of fire, with new ones sprouting up all over his strange body. The rain was falling faster now, faster, and the boy held up his hand to shield himself from the raindrops, which streamed down his face and were deep red. Blood. It was raining blood. Harper fell to his knees in total shock as drops of crimson fell from the sky and colored the world with its awful stain.
Thank you for helping me change. I'll put in a good word.
The angel, tall and magnificent yet terrible as heartache, stepped between Harper and his parents. Someone began screaming next door, and then all at once the screams could be heard everywhere. Harper looked up, his eyes stinging from the hot rain of blood, and saw through a gap in the clouds that the moon was out, and around it the stars. It was 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Harper's angel, his beast, whatever it was, now stepped up to Harper's parents and spoke using all the voices of the damned.
Be afraid.
Somewhere the sun shines. Somewhere the birds sing the glory of a new dawn. Somewhere it's spring again. But here it's always Halloween. It's the Rogue Transmission's halfway to Halloween hullabaloo. Rogue Transmissions, an unhinged anthology of indie podcasts, is invading your streaming device to throw a hell-raising halfway to Halloween party. Featuring all of your indie podcasting favorites, including Brew Crime, Chick Lit, Octoberpod, our true crime podcast, Pitney and Amelia's Bitchin' Boutique, Spine Chillers and Serial Killers, Serial Napper, Twisted and Uncorked, and Witches Talking Tarot. It's coming Tuesday, April 29th to this podcast. That's right, the Rogue Transmissions Halfway to Halloween Hullabaloo is coming to the podcast you're listening to right now on Tuesday, April 29th, 2025. Rogue Transmissions. Rogue Transmissions. Rogue Transmissions! Halfway to Halloween Hullabaloo. List of participating podcasts may vary. Intended for external use only. Enjoy road transmissions responsibly. Void where prohibited.
They ought to make the day the time changes, the first day of summer.
What?
Well, it's 8 o'clock and it's still light.
A lot of good the extra daylight does us.
That bastard daylight savings time. When you hear this, the shitification and the damnable blight on our existence that is DST will have been in effect for most of the US of A for just about a month. I hate this pushing forward of the clock's hands for so many reasons, but mostly because no one knows what it's for, and it seems increasingly like some bullshit concocted by early to bed, early to rise, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, if you arrive on time, you're late, type A personality motherfuckers to enslave the rest of us long-suffering folk who, unlike them, are late risers and or night owls, for whom the daylight hours are the least productive. A little ritual of mine, to cope with the time change, is to watch Night of the Living Dead whenever our clocks spring forward, because, appropriately enough, that's the day all the horror begins.
Hey, son of a gun! It's refreshment time!
Holy smokes, I almost forgot. It's intermission time, folks, and I'm your host, Mr. Edward October. Between the acts of Octoberpod, I'm going to share with you some remembrances of George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, and I'll attempt to explain to you why that zombie classic is so special to me. And if you haven't seen this picture, pause the podcast right now and return after you've watched it. There's a handsome Criterion Blu-ray, and the damn thing's in the public domain, so you have no excuse not to watch it. So pause it right here. We'll wait. And we're back. Wasn't that a great picture? What do you mean you didn't watch it? Fine, but let this be your warning. Here be spoilers, potentially. Let's start with the day the time changes. Setting the film on this day, for whatever reason, gives the picture a mystique that's hard to pin down. It places Night of the Living Dead in a twilight state, blurring the lines between night and day, and signaling early on that the world has changed. The status quo has been shattered, whether Barbara and Johnny realize it or not, and the world will soon be flipped on its axis. Indeed, this picture was the product of perhaps the most turbulent period of modern history, and as such, societal upheaval is at the very heart of Night of the Living Dead. Hell, George A. Romero was famously transporting the final print of the film in his car when he heard over the radio that Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated. The Vietnam War was still churning out the corpses of young Americans like so much raw beef through a meat grinder, while back home, the civil rights movement was standing tall in the face of grotesque acts of violence and social injustice back home. And then there was Night of the Living Dead, a rough little black and white picture which resembled, through its documentarian mise-en-scène and nihilistic detachment, news footage of the war in Vietnam, or from race riots in the American South. Romero cast Dwayne Jones, a black man, as the hero of the picture. A hero who meets an end that looks for all the world like a lynching. I was always sheltered from scary stuff by my parents. Well, at least until I was about 11 or 12. But Night of the Living Dead was a special case. My dad had taken my mom to see it when he was in the Navy, on the night before he shipped out for 6 months or so in the South China Sea. The film terrified my mother, who then had to fend for herself all alone in an unfamiliar city while my father was away on duty. She always referred to Night of the Living Dead as the scariest picture ever made, and warned me to steer clear of it. And I did, for a time. Imagine my delight when my cool older cousin suggested we rent a VHS copy of it and watch it one summer afternoon when we were hanging out together. I rented the original version, but he was expecting to watch the 1990 remake directed by Tom Savini and starring the late Tony Todd in the role originated by Dwayne Jones. I wasn't able to enjoy it much because my cousin got bored watching this cheap, somewhat artsy, black and white independent film that contained only a fraction of the gore and grue he was expecting. I would later revisit it on my own, frequently, after getting my hands on the Good Times home video VHS release of it. This, unfortunately, was the colorized version. I had to take what I could get, but that didn't blunt the picture's impact on me. Night of the Living Dead still managed to lure me into its gray world of overcast skies and human lives reduced to kindling for a hungry fire. Quick sidebar. You know, today Night of the Living Dead is held up in a place of honor. It's lauded as a grim masterpiece with a clear political message, one that remains relevant even today. Boy, howdy. It's in the Criterion Collection, as I mentioned earlier. But in the late 80s and 90s, it was treated as something of a joke, as something schlocky like Plan 9 from Outer Space or I Was a Teenage Werewolf. Every Halloween you could expect a beer commercial, I remember one with Joe Piscopo, to parody Romero's black and white zombies. It was even featured on an episode of Mad Movies with the LA Connection. That show ran in the late 80s, early 90s during Nickelodeon's Nick at Night programming block. They'd edit an old public domain movie down to fit in a 30-minute TV time slot and then replace the movie's original dialogue with new dialogue written and performed by a troupe of not terribly funny improv comedians, the LA Connection. Though those guys were called the LA Connection. Remember the clip I played at the top of the intermission with Barbara and Johnny pulling up to the graveyard and talking about daylight savings time? Well, here's the Mad Movies version of that same scene.
Good thing we ran out of gas so close to the house, huh, Johnny?
You bet.
Well, the guests will be here soon.
Look, Florine, we've had so many parties before, no one ever shows up. Why should this time be any different?
But this time I invited some people.
Now, you should have decorated. Look at this place.
If that doesn't tell you all you need to know about the condescending treatment Night of the Living Dead received in the 80s and 90s, I don't know what does. Perhaps the jokey Return of the Living Dead spin-off series was partly to blame. But in my mind, thanks to my mother hyping it up, as she'd also done with The Omen, Night of the Living Dead was always something dangerous and subversive. A piece of cursed media, if you will. And I loved it. As a latchkey kid, one of my favorite things to do whenever I was alone in the house, especially if the skies were dark with a storm brewing, was to put on a scary movie. On these occasions, I'd often shove the dread-inducing Night of the Living Dead into the old VCR. One afternoon, I let myself in after school. I must have been in 7th grade at the time. We lived right across from my elementary school. Literally, you could watch buses loading and unloading kids from our front porch. My dad was working a swing shift, and my mom was going to be home late. And already the black clouds were gathering. They were so black that it looked like night, even though it wasn't quite supper time yet. What better time to throw on this zombie classic? A thunderstorm came rolling through, and cousin, it rolled through hot. Every thunderclap was loud enough to rattle the windows. It definitely added a terrifying edge to what was already a creepy-as-hell horror picture. At some point, I believe I turned off the TV to watch the storm. I remember I was looking out the window towards the elementary school when a blinding light flooded the house. And there was a thunderclap so loud and window rattling that I nearly jumped out of my skin with fright. The next day I was at school and casually chatting with a teacher about the monster storm that had rolled through. I told her which house I lived in and mentioned the huge thunderclap. Her eyes widened and her jaw dropped. "That was your house?" she shrieked. apparently she'd stayed after school and was looking out the window at the storm, just as I'd been looking out the window towards the school, and she saw a bolt of lightning strike our chimney, blowing flaming chunks of brick all over the yard. Sure enough, we were finding brick pieces in the yard for weeks after that. I think my dad even ran over one with the lawnmower. And so, pardon me a moment. Yep, that's the end of our intermission. I'm being told that the snack bar is about to close up. If you need to grab a snack or a refill on your drink, better do so quickly, because Act 2 of Octoberpod starts now.
Granddad used to tell us ghost stories when we went camping. And without fail, he'd scare us kids so bad that we wouldn't sleep a wink. He'd stoke up the campfire and spin yarns about ghost trains and lost Indian tribes, tell us tales of phantom lovers searching the woods for one another, tales of the Bigfoot-like creature who eats all the catfish from the lake. But the story that sticks with me most is the curse of Settlers Point.
The Littlest Angel, from a true story submitted by UT Catmom. Narrated by Jen, co-host of Our True Crime Podcast.
In the 1780s, several families, Scotch-Irish immigrants, fur trappers mostly, set down roots in the foothills outside the trading posts that would one day become my hometown. They had everything they needed to survive and prosper. Decades passed. Then, around the turn of the century, they built Grace Chapel, the first permanent church in Settlers Point. Now, this community of farmers and trappers was too small to have its own preacher. So for years, they'd share preachers with small churches and nearby communities. Settlers Point had a tendency to draw fire and brimstone preachers, each one partial to Old Testament wrath and New Testament revelation. Then, in 1938, during the Great Depression, Reverend Jubal Trent was asked to become the first permanent minister at Grace Chapel. It was said that Reverend Trent's sermons were fiery and full of bloody gore. By all accounts, though, his congregation loved it so much they would have sopped it up with a biscuit. But all that changed after a series of dalliances between Reverend Trent and the daughter of a respected tobacco farmer. The good Reverend put a baby in her belly, and when the poor girl's father found out, he had Reverend Trent beaten half to death and run out of town. And according to Granddad's story, Reverend Trent put a curse on the town as he left.
By God, this town will drown in blood before the solstice comes.
That year brought with it a fulfillment of the Reverend's awful curse. The low temperatures that winter shattered records, and it seemed the thaw would never come. Farmers had to sow crops late into the growing season. What crops were planted fell victim to a mysterious blight. Many families scraped and starved that year. Banks foreclosed on farms, and people were left penniless after generations of prosperity. What's more, a strain of flu burned its way through Settlers Point, killing off half of the very young and most of the very old. Old-timers like Granddad claimed that the townspeople went to church every Sunday and prayed for relief from their misfortune. Whenever he told the story, Granddad would say that even if God sent down the littlest angel to help him, it'd be a blessing. No such blessing came. A year later to the day, a lumber mill worker who lived in a holler several miles below Settlers Point saw two girls no older than 11 or 12 stumbling down from the mountain. They were wearing rags that were soaked from head to foot with blood. They were hysterical and babbled about demons who swarmed the city and slaughtered everyone in sight. They left none alive. It was a miracle these girls managed to escape the demon's scrutiny. The man who found them obviously didn't believe their story, but he called the sheriff anyway. The sheriff and a handful of deputies made their way up the lonely mountain road. And when they got to Settlers Point, they found a massacre the likes of which they'd only read about in westerns. Women and children lay slaughtered in the unpaved streets. The ground was black and sticky with blood and gore. A handful of men had been butchered and lashed to trees and signposts. The FBI became involved in the investigation, but quickly lost interest when no link to any famous gangsters could be established. Still, they managed to determine that all, or nearly all, of those poor people were killed with some sort of unidentifiable high-caliber firearm, a firearm powerful enough to obliterate human tissue into dust. No one ever came to live there again. Properties were foreclosed on, and the whole town was left in the woods to deteriorate. In the decades since the massacre, the woods have grown up around it, so much so that you can hardly tell there was ever a town up there. But according to Granddad, if you know where to look, it's easy enough to find the cursed ruins of Settlers Point. Pretty neat story, huh? Especially for around the campfire. I mean, I've spent many restless nights under the stars haunted by Granddad's tale. And like all good campfire stories, it has a basis in fact. There is a real Settlers Point, a small town deserted after a real massacre. Now, I don't know about a curse or about demons, but everything else happened just as Granddad said. Me and my friends in high school used to load up the car and drive around looking for the abandoned mountain road that led to the ghost town. We never found it, though we spent many autumn nights trying, back when I was doing my master's coursework. I'm a social worker now. I wrote a paper once on the sociological effects of violence in small communities. I chose Settlers Point as my subject. Now, I'm not going to bore you with all the historical bits I dug up. However, I did find the exact location of Settlers Point's ruins. During spring break of that year, I traveled back home with my boyfriend, and we set aside a day to go backpacking up there. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you something important. The campfire tale that my granddad told us was that the preacher was run out of town, and he cursed the town that he left. But, according to my research, he was beaten to death by an angry mob right there on the steps of the church, possibly uttering the curse as he lay dying. This version of the event comes from an account published in the county newspaper. A friend of mine in law school combed through some of the vintage police records, but couldn't find any charges filed in relation to this murder. Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, the ruins. Okay. So, me and my boyfriend, we backpacked up to Settlers Point. It was much farther from my hometown than I expected. In fact, it was about sundown when we got all the way up there. And the town was much smaller than I thought. I mean, maybe a bunch of buildings had been raised, but what we saw looked like nothing more than a tiny general store and a church. I say church, but it really was just a one-room chapel. It was the only building we stepped inside because the building shared by the general store and post office and the one home still standing were in such bad shape we thought just by stepping inside we might cause the whole thing to crumble. The church was a much more solid structure. When we found it, there was a young poplar growing straight up through a hole in the roof. A carpet of weeds and sticker bushes covered the warped, uneven timbers of the floor. The stone walls looked all hairy with moss and ivy. It was an eerie place. The whole time I was inside, I couldn't stop thinking that a man was lynched on the steps of this very building. After that, we explored the surrounding area in widening circles. We found a handful of deserted homes, monuments to abandoned lives. An eerie sense of sadness hung about the whole place. We set up our tents not far from the remnants of Settlers Point. We weren't brave enough to actually camp inside the town. It was a wild, restless night for sure. I kept dreaming that the ghost of Reverend Trent was lingering just outside our campsite. If the wind blew or a leaf or a twig dropped on our tent, I imagined it was his blood dripping into the rainfly. Well, now we can fast forward to about a week and a half later. I managed to track down the name of a woman who lived in Settlers Point during the Depression. She was way up in her 90s and was in hospice care in Knoxville. Her name was Eunice Baumgartner, and she would have been just a little tiny girl at the time of the massacre. Now, I know what you're thinking. Not many people would have gone to such lengths for a master's project, and I'm no private detective. But let's just say I knew some people who could pull some strings. Anyway, I spoke to Eunice's daughter and arranged to visit the old lady at her bedside. We spoke for a long time between her naps. She was fairly well sedated. A lot of our little talk was about UT football and raising tomatoes, so I won't bore you with the blow-by-blow replay of our conversation. Well, with a little prodding from her daughter, who's pretty much an old lady herself. Eunice told me a little bit about her time in Settlers Point. Apparently, more people survived it than the legend would imply. She wasn't one of the blood-spattered little girls who came off the mountain, but Eunice said she did know both of them from church. I asked her about Reverend Trent. She said she really didn't remember him and was, of course, not there when he was beaten to death. But she did say that she remembered seeing red stains on the church step and asking her daddy about it. He told her that this old hobo had come into town and cleaned and gutted some trout right there on the steps before someone ran him off. Eunice said she never did believe this story. She became less lucid as her meds started to kick in, but she repeatedly said that things were bad in Settlers Point, with people just barely scraping by. We prayed and prayed for a little angel to come out and put an end to all this struggle and misery, she said. She also said that people were praying to be cleansed of the sins that Reverend Trent had infected the town with. Eunice's doctor was planning on visiting soon, so I kind of hastily asked about the massacre. She became visibly pissed off when I asked her these questions, but she answered them as best she could. She said she was walking home from the dime store when the strangers came into town. That's what she called them. Strangers. They were all beautiful, like movie stars, except they were dressed awfully peculiar. Eunice said she walked past one of them and remembered thinking his eyes were black. How many of them were there? Were they all men, I asked. They were so beautiful, she said, looking at a point somewhere on the ceiling. Then she looked back at me with an expression on her face that was so crooked. I thought she might be having a stroke. We lived a good piece outside town, she said. I was halfway home before I heard the booming gunshots. Booming and screaming. Screams just like the lake of fire. She said this as she began to doze off again. I had to ask her one last question while she was still awake. Eunice, I asked, do you believe that those strangers were demons? Demons, she replied. They weren't demons. Child, we prayed them there.
Stick around after the credits for a brief word from some of our fellow indie podcasters, creators, and friends. There may even be some bloopers, outtakes, and bonus content as well. You have been listening to Octoberpod. Octoberpod is produced, edited, and directed by Edward October. The series co-producers are MJ McAdams and Amber Jordan. Logo and banner graphics by Jessica Good. Edward October character design by Nick Calavera. Select still photography courtesy of unsplash.com. Select music cues by Dr. Dreamchip and various other stock music and sound effects courtesy of freesound.org. Music from Bigfoot Apocalypse and Thorax, theme from Octoberpod, composed by Nico Vitezi. All other images, music, and FX cues, except where noted, are sourced from within the public domain. Follow us on YouTube at Octoberpod Home Video, on Instagram, and the app I still call Twitter at Octoberpod VHS, and on TikTok and Blue Sky at Octoberpod. Or find us and all of our links on the World Wide Web at octoberpodvhs.com. For business inquiries or story submissions, email octoberpod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this program, we'd be very pleased if you told your friends about us. And while you're at it, write us a 5-star or equivalent review wherever you're listening. The man who spoke to you was Mr. Edward October.
Welcome to Colony 7-2.
How often do you get let into a moon colony, Will? This is history in the making.
New vaccine. It's supposed to protect you from the zombie virus. Just a precaution.
The name's Hen.
I'm one of the local radio hosts, and you have been assigned as my co-host.
Oh my god, are you okay? You're not looking too good. Are you...
Shit! Someone just turned!
Oh shit.
What? Will, what do you mean?
Do you think this is a scratch or a bite?
Hey, it's only 3 days. Till, you know, either he turns or he doesn't. Simple as that.
Listen to Apocalypse Radio wherever you get your podcasts.
When you're alone in your house, but you'd like to feel like you're not, the podcast inside your house can keep you company. Our show will make sure that you run up the stairs at night when you turn off the lights and check under your bed before you sleep. We'll fill your dreams and nightmares with bizarre birds, creepy crawlers, and heroic hitmen. We'll have you pulling back the shower curtain, just in case, and side-eyeing your closets as you walk past them. We'll bring you everything from the classics that you know and love to the strange and often silly world of creepypastas. We've even got some stories written just for the show that you won't hear anywhere else. So go check out the podcast inside your house. We're on all major platforms, as well as inside your pantry, your crawl space, and sitting at the foot of your bed at night, watching you sleep.
All right, here we go. That Bastard Daylight Savings Time, a memoir of the living dead. A memoir of the living dead, an Octoberpod intermission program by Edward October. Yes, you'll hear plane noises, but I'm just not going to give a fuck, I think. Well, maybe I care about this one. See, the trick is not minding. That's the trick to everything, is just not caring.
4. In the 1780s, several families, Scotch-Irish immigrants, fur trappers. 4.
Here comes the plane again, flying above my fucking house. Here comes the plane again. I wish it was quiet as a mouse. 24. Angel. We got a fucking crop duster now? There's a hovercraft coming over. And a World War I biplane. And a crop duster. A couple of choppers. A rusty Chevette with no muffler. Are we good, people? All right. 24. Plane. The plane, it flies into my brain. I am gonna go insane. 'Cause of that motherfucking plane flying up in my motherfucking brain. Okay.
Should I do that as Grandpa's voice? I kind of feel weird. Should I go, even if God sent the littlest angel to help him, it'd be a blessing?
I don't always turn on the heat. But when I do, I prefer to do it when we're mid-sentence recording audio.
He told her that this old hobo had come into town and cleaned and gutted some Nope. He told her that his old...
So each of these is going to have a crash sting. I didn't highlight them in red, so they don't exist. Motherfuck.
And the decades since the manager... Nope, not manager, it's a massacre. Massacre!
The next day I was at school and casually chatting. God damn it. Hey, guy. It's plane time, man. Son of a gun. It's air traffic time, baby. I'm gonna lose my fucking mind, baby. Boop. Oh my God, it's the Big Bopper. is the ghost of the Big Bopper in his plane. Hello, baby, Chantilly lays up in your face, you piece of shit. Hanging down. Okay.
She became less lucid as her meds started to kick in, but she repeatedly said things that were bad in Settlers. Nope. But I'm going to take a drink. I'm sorry.
Hello, baby. Did you miss me? Did you miss me? I am a plane driving you insane, and I'm making noise up in here.
We set up our tents not far from the remnants. Nope, remnants. That's not remnants, it's remnants. I wanted it to be longer.
To shield his face from the raindrops, which now streamed down. No, the rain was falling. The boy held up his hand to shield his face from the raindrops, which now... To shield himself from the raindrops, which now streamed down his face. Deep.
A carpet of weeds and sticker bushes covered the warp, uneven shiver me timbers. I said that wrong.
Music. Start playing that shitty-ass Mad Movies theme as underscore.
Saw two girls, no older than 11 or 12.
The excitement is palpable. The excitement is palpable.
All right. You'll have to, that's all I got. If you want me to speed it up, if you want me to try to do an accent, just let me know. I don't know. But anyway, good script. I like it. So different from the Littlest Angel I know. Mine was all Christian-based, and yours is about demons. All right. You could do this. Child, we prayed them there. Does that sound good?
Be afraid. End.